Especially since I have the screen, I can't see the chat.
Maybe we should go ahead and get started. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Because I see that we've got about 20 participants, and I know there's so much wonderful things that we're going to talk about. Want to welcome everybody. Good evening. My name is Sharon Huang, and I'm the founder of Hudson Way Immersion School. We're a Mandarin and Spanish immersion program for children ages 2 through grade 8. We have a location in New Jersey and one in New York. And we're kicking off tonight our webinar series. And we're super excited to have Dr. Barbara Pearson. And I have her wonderful book here. You see the dog ears and the notes here, Raising a Bilingual Child. As a founder of Hudson Way, yes, I have relied on this as a resource because it not only has the studies, the scientific studies, which usually books that go into the studies are very sort of academic, but this has a nice blend of the academic and the practical. Dr. Pearson has spent the last 20 years in linguistics and bilingual education. She's a professor of linguistics at the University of Massachusetts. So welcome, Barbara, and we're excited to have you kick off Demystifying the Myths tonight. We're going to record this, and we are going to go through a presentation and have about 15 minutes at the end for some Q&A. And if you want to type in your questions, we will we'll read back the questions and we'll take on the Q&A. Okay.
Otherwise, I'll ask them questions.
Good, true professor.
So, okay. I'm very thrilled to be here this evening. Thank you so much for the invitation. I get to talk about one of my most favorite topics, bilingual immersion learning and schooling. And it's a little bit disconcerting, I confess, to not have, luckily I have Sharon that you can look at and see, oh yes, I'm not just talking into the cyberspace. But it's certainly my favorite topic, and let me see if I can't just get this to go. So, favorite topic that I write about academically, but this book was just sort of handed to me on a platter. I was invited by Random House to, do you want to write a book for parents on raising a bilingual child? And it was like, what? Of course. Why didn't I think of that? So it was great to have that opportunity and to reach so many people. Then I sought out translators because I was really eager to have it in Spanish. Conseguí que tu hijo sea bilingüe. And then a colleague in Poland decided that they needed it in Polish. And of course, when we heard it was in Polish, we thought, oh, why couldn't it be Chinese? So here it is in Mandarin as well. And now I'm working on a children's book. And if we have time at the end, I'll get a chance to show it, a little bit of it to you. Okay. So my bilingual background, I started out completely monolingual in a family in New York, but a little girl who always said, oh, I love languages. So everybody said, oh, you got to go to Middlebury. So I did. And, but the best thing was my junior year in France when I became bilingual. But it wasn't until after college that I found linguistics, and I got a Ph.D. in applied linguistics eventually. And this was such a heyday. I've listed the names. I don't know if they mean anything to people, but Chomsky, Lakoff is in the news these days too. Roger Brown is the beginning of child language study in a scientific way. Anyway, life happened and life brought us to Miami before we finished graduate school, and I was there for 30 years, and we did this bilingualism study group where we did two funded National Institutes of Health studies that were over about 8 or 9 years. And then life brought us to Amherst, Mass, which is wonderful. And we've been here forever and ever as well. And I've worked more on bilingualism and also African American English, which is what AAE is. But the big question that everybody asks me is, did I raise my children bilingually? And the answer is no, I didn't have my book. So I was very excited to move to Miami during graduate school, where I thought, oh, kids are just they're gonna become bilingual automatically. I didn't realize that I had to do something. So it didn't happen automatically. Fortunately, our two children eventually became bilingual as teens and young adults, and our son married a Cuban American woman, and so I at least have grandchildren who are childhood bilinguals. And here's the youngest, Daphne Sophia, when she was 3. Okay, I'm a grandmother. I'm supposed to do that stuff. Anyway, at the time that our kids were little and I was wanting them to be bilingual and it wasn't happening, there was only one immersion school in the city. In fact, it's the first one in the country. And here it is, Coral Bay Elementary. But it wasn't in my neighborhood. It wasn't my neighborhood school, and we would have had to move. And in those early days, couldn't afford to move. So luckily, later when I was a researcher, I was able to do a study of two immersion schools in Miami, and one of them was Coral Bay Elementary. And it was through that I got a real appreciation for the value and somewhat the ease of early language education, and both in the home and in schools. So we wrote that up in this book, Language and Literacy in Bilingual Children. It was edited by the principal investigators, but I have about 7 chapters in there. So I still consider it my book too. And it was our study. My research partner and I designed the study. So anyway, I'm not saying it's easy, but it does take advantage of the child's brain and factors about it being able to be more plastic and learn things and apply their native capacity. The part of the human heritage to learn language encompasses 2, 3, 4, as many as you have time. You have to have time and people to learn them from. So if I flash forward, I could say that the key is to make it rewarding for the child. But that's next time's meta. That's the webinar we're going to do in a couple of weeks. So one thing I did learn over all these years is that there are many ways to give children the gift of being bilingual. And being a child bilingual is truly a gift. It's not something a child can do for him or herself. So the parents are the ones that give that gift. They have to make the decision for the child because they can't wait for the child to have the knowledge and maturity to, 1, recognize the benefit, and 2, the advantages of learning bilingually from an early age, earlier than the child is capable of starting it. So the beauty, and whatever your language resources, whether you're going to be doing it in the home or through the school or both, the school ends up being a great asset. And I know I interviewed about 100 families for the book, and so many of them said, oh, well, luckily we got to this, we had a school in our area and we were able to do that. So school is a great asset. And one of the beauties of immersion is that you're not learning the language, you're learning in the language, which is a huge difference. It's only people like me, linguists, are the only ones who like to study language out of context. And we're a very tiny field. Most of the people in this world care about what language can do for them. And when you think about it, it's hard to imagine any time that you spend without language for communicating. That's usually people's first big answer. For me, the big one is it really helps you think, really increases your power to thinking. Expressing emotions, cultural understanding, learning, singing, theater, word problems. I'm studying that one now. Stories, poetry, movies, whatever you want to put in there. It's all with language. And the anthropologists have never found a group that didn't speak or sign. And And we have some indication from prehistory that there was trade between prehistoric peoples, and so they must have talked to each other somehow. Anyway, when we become bilingual, we get all of this from two languages and cultures, not just one. So you know the old joke? I'm sure you do, but humor me. What do you call someone who speaks two languages? Bilingual. What do you call someone who speaks three languages? Trilingual. And what do you call someone who speaks one language? American. Okay, so the first big myth that we're going to talk about is that monolingual is the normal thing to be. I don't know, it seems like the US actually prides itself on being monolingual. I don't know if any of you remember the English only movement, but with great unhappiness, I do. And here I brought just a graph from Ethnologue, which is a great resource about languages. And it has just the first four languages, the four most spoken languages, as they say, and including native speakers and non-native speakers, people who speak it as a second, third, or fourth language. So one of the things that we see from this graph is that, of course, English and Mandarin are about neck and neck, but Mandarin is coming up and is supposed to be surpassing English relatively soon. But the other key, and between them, they're about 1 billion and a third. So, and they're way ahead of 3 and 4. But the other lesson I get from this is that there are a lot of there's a lot of bilinguals represented in this graph, at least 1 billion. Okay, so if there's 1 billion at least bilinguals, one thing you can know is it's not impossible to be bilingual. It's not too difficult and exotic. And one thing I like to say is it's not rocket science to raise a bilingual child, but it's not a slam dunk either. So, and of course, I think I'm going to skip the part about how horrible we are in the US in teaching languages. And it's getting worse. It's going way backwards. So here I am saying, except for little pockets like Waldorf schools where they really think it's important for children to study languages in elementary school. It's important for their education and their development, and a growing number of immersion schools like yours. Mostly we wait till kids are just past the age when they would be able to learn it, and that's when we teach it. So, and we have a whole generations of adults who who took a few years of another language but can barely order coffee. So when I started my research career, it was considered bad to teach children to be bilingual. And in fact, that's why I went into the field. I said, how could that be? What is that based on? How could it be bad to be bilingual? And so I'll tell you how I pursued that. But I look forward to the day when we'll wonder what's wrong with a child that speaks only one language. What's the matter with that kid? Only one language. How boring. But for now, we can just be proud that we're getting ahead of the curve where the future is bilingual. So a second language used to be a prerequisite to be an educated person, and it still is a very good way to educate yourself about the world, about your place in the world, and to be a citizen of the world. And I can't think of a better lesson to give children as they're figuring out who they are in the first stage, not the teenage angst, but when kids are really discovering the world, and to see where they fit in this bigger picture, and get another language is really just a great avenue into that, and to help understand about other cultures and also get a little bit more perspective on your own. And we express our common humanity when we reach out to people in their language, okay? That it's worth, that we respect them enough to try and learn their language and speak to them in their language. And we hope people will do that for us too when it's convenient. My book is full of stuff on cognitive benefits, divergent, lots of things that are good for kids, for children. But the second one, staving off dementia, hit the news about a dozen years ago, where a colleague, Ellen Bialystock in Canada, was with some doctors, were looking at charts of people who were demented, who had dementia, and realized that those who were bilinguals were 4 years later, on average, to become have dementia. So one of the doctors said, "Boy, if I could invent a drug that would give me 4 more years of lucid brain power, it would be worth a lot." And so I translate that into being bilingual is worth a lot. And I hesitated before putting metalinguistic and phonological awareness in the in the slides tonight, because it's a big word. My sister, who writes books like Chicken Soup for the Soul, says, "That's a big word. I'm closing your book, Barbara." But it's such a big advantage for bilingual children to have two languages that they're aware of as languages. So let me try just one tiny explanation of what metalinguistic awareness is. If I tell you that Boston is a city in Massachusetts, I'm using the word, okay? I'm using it. But if I tell you that Boston, the word Boston has two O's in it, I'm not telling you anything about the meaning of Boston. I'm focusing your attention on the word. And that's what you need to do before you can read. You can't possibly read unless you have some sense of that. You don't have to be able to explain it. I probably couldn't explain it till I was 35. But you have to have that sense. And little bilinguals, I think it's usually around 2 1/4. You're speaking the wrong language. You're supposed to speak that language, and you're supposed to speak that language. And they're very aware of what a language, that there are different languages. And this is really one of the most important things. And if you do any reading about research about reading, you'll see phonological awareness. And so this most obvious cognitive benefit is to help children when they go to break into reading. Okay. So what do children need? This is one slide on this, because this is not a talk about children. This is a talk about parents. Okay. So what do children need in order to become bilingual? In my book, I had this little thing that you have from old detective novels, motive and opportunity. Who killed who were the suspects in this murder case? Who had the motive? Who had the opportunity? And that's what children need. They need motive and opportunity. So I'm going to start with opportunity, because that's concrete, and we know that you need to create a situation where the child has access to people who speak the language that you want them to learn, and time to interact on a consistent basis with those people. So this is sort of like you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. If you don't bring him to water, he's not going to drink. So you have to give them the opportunity, and you have to make it possible. But if you really want him to drink the water, the child has to be motivated to do it. You can't make motivation. I take that back. You can't make motivation in the moment. You build motivation over a long period of time by, the same way Madison Avenue ad makers do. They make us want things we don't necessarily want. Well, maybe your child didn't ever think he wanted to be bilingual, but you use all these little techniques to make it so attractive to him or her that that's what they want. And they say, I'm bilingual. And I have a friend whose little mantra with her child is, "What's your superpower?" And he goes, "I'm bilingual." So your child has to consider it a superpower, a very sought after one. But the question is, since it's the parent who's engineering this opportunity and also really monitoring the motivation and working on the motivation, the child's motivation, the question is, what do parents need in order to give children this motive and opportunity? And it's something that takes place over a long period of time. So there's a lot of opportunity for you to doubt that you're doing the right thing or that you're doing it right. So the two things that I try to put in my book are things to give parents confidence that they're doing the right thing, that science is on their side, and that their children are going to love them for it, or going to thank them for it, even if they're not going to they may not thank them for it when they're 11, but they will when they're 21. Okay, and there again, you know, it's like so silly to have convince people that it's better to have two languages than one language, right? It should be a no-brainer to have access, talk to more people, it's access more literature, more ideas. If you're a business person, you can have more customers. And in my book, and we just talked a little bit about some of the cognitive benefits, but you have to have enough to know how to respond to these myths from the naysayers. So perhaps, so like we said, the first myth, of course, is that monolingual is the basis, and you're messing with the natural state when you try and become bilingual. But have you ever heard someone say, "Oh, bilinguals are slower to learn language"? If I start my child on a second language, he or she will be behind in English, or it'll weaken the English. And people seem to believe this based on anecdotes and personal observation of a few people. And I'm sure there are bilinguals that are slower because there's an average. And if there's an average, then there's going to be people below the average and above the average, except for in Lake Wobegon, of course. But it's just sort of a convenient thing. And as I said, I was really interested to find out what is the empirical evidence. Why do people think it's slower? And I've spent a career making very careful comparisons. And when you carefully have apples and apples, we find no statistical differences. Partly because the range of normal is so large, but also there's no, you know, when you make a careful comparison, there's no statistical differences in all these things that people were telling you not to do. Now, obviously, it is possible to handicap a bilingual person by putting them in a subtractive situation. So if you put them in a subtractive situation where you take away one of the languages while they're still learning it and expect them to learn another one without the resource and the support of that first language, well, it's like having both of your hands tied behind your back when you go to do something. And it's much easier for the child with additive, and it's also easier not to suppress another language. Just go ahead and add it. Okay. So one of the questions that I tried to take up in the book, and if you'll let me do it, I'm going to read a little bit from my book. Because I always think of this. Why can't we have a definitive answer? Is it good or slow or fast or bad? And so I had this one parent who said in exasperation, "I've read everything and it's opposite, and I'm quite confused. If there's a scientific study with statistics on the advantages and disadvantages of being bilingual that could allow us to decide clearly, yes, it's good, or no, it's bad, I would be interested in such a study." Well, the required experiment to write up as that study is not available to us. So we can't just go into a major metropolitan hospital and assign every other baby to being raised bilingually. So even if that were not completely out of the realm of possibility or ethical behavior, it's equally improbable that for the 15 or 20 years it takes for children to grow up, that the only factor affecting how the groups, the children in the different groups developed would be the number of languages that were spoken to them over the course of their lives. So there's a kind of a gold standard in research for experimental design. In Miami, I put here quasi, I should have put natural experiments. We used natural experiments. We had bilingual kids. We had monolingual kids. We tried to equate them and as much as we could. We took schools that spent the same amount of money on each child, whose teachers had the same amount of background, who had the same social economic class. And then we varied things systematically. So we had one group that was monolingual, high and low SES, but among bilinguals, we were looking at only Spanish in the home, Spanish and English in the home, high SES, low SES, high SES, low SES. And then in each of those groups, we split them into groups that had only English in the school or English and Spanish in the school. And so we did it at kindergarten, third, second, and fifth grade. And so we had like 36 groups. And the colleague that was my co-author on the study, on the grant that we did, I called her a control freak, because we had lots of things, lots of comparisons that we could make that were going to give us some information, but it wouldn't definitively tell us. It would just sort of support. But Sharon put me onto the study from the Rand Corporation, where they actually used random assignment. So and I'm reading again here. This is book page, can't read it, 244. So the most crucial element of a true experimental design is random assignment. If there are other factors that might influence the results, people with those factors might have to be just as likely to be in the control group as in the experimental group. And if in fact you're able to do that and keep everything else clean, then there's going to be a higher probability that whatever you're interested in caused the difference. But we just have these natural experiments and we do the best we can. So we can't answer you that question. They did their experimental study and they put in their little introduction that we're the largest study to date. And the way they did the random was that they avoided the problem of self-selection by they were studying the Immersion program in the Portland public schools, which had been going for several years, and it had a lottery. People got into it by lottery, and there were more people that wanted to be in it than there were spaces. So there was your control group. There were people who wanted to be in it, so they would have been the self-selected just the same way the ones that were in it were self-selected. And then they compared them. And in the results, the reading was the clearest advantage. And then I give you one more thing here about that Rand thing, having to do with, it's hard enough to, many people think, well, it's hard enough to learn math and science in your first language, much less the second. Well, once again, the Rand study has a little bit of an answer that's a little more credible than most of the studies that you're going to see out there. The kids at the far point of their following them in their school careers, they weren't better in the bilingual children were not better in math and science, but they were not worse. So they had learned math and science in both English and whatever the second language was. So there's lots of other studies that may have different findings, but none of them have random assignment to groups. So is it true that, this is another doubt you might have, is it true that one language sort of takes away from the other? For example, sometimes it seems like they do. When I come back from France and I've been speaking French for a couple of weeks, it takes me a couple of days to get used to speaking English. It's like I go to speak English and now it comes French, right? Because I don't have a switch. I just have to wait for it to kind of sort out. If I were going back and forth, I wouldn't have that problem, but if I stay in one. Anyway, vocabulary should be a really clear example of one language taking away from the other. And it's Pearson, me, et al. In 1997 was able to show, and it's ridiculous how it was kind of It was hard to write this paper because people didn't think it was, okay, everybody in the world thought it was true, but linguists didn't think it was true. So you had to do it for linguists who didn't think it was true and thought you were blaspheming. But we did show that vocabulary size in each language was in fact related to the amount of time that children spoke interacting with people in that language. So so then you say, well, of course, so how could they have the same amount of time if they have to split it between two languages? And so in fact, the language of a bilingual maybe in a single language will be a little bit less because there's some of the vocabulary that's distributed into the other language that they will never get to count in their score. But why are you comparing? Why are you comparing the vocabulary? Sometimes you want to know because you're planning a school program and you want to know how many words, relative to peers they know. But when you're doing it we were doing it with babies and toddlers, and then we subsequently kept going older with the kids. What you want to know is not how many English words they know or how many Mandarin words they know. You want to know how many words do they have a word for? How many concepts do they have a word for? So how many things are there that they can talk about so they can learn about them? So what you're interested in is not language A or language B, but this sort of more general language, whatever. So and then there's a couple of other things, but I won't go into them today because there will not be a quiz. Okay. So they could take away, and so they could very easily take away from each other, but that doesn't happen when you value both languages and you support both of the languages. Now, Sharon's going to jump up and say, oh, but we only really work on the immersion one, the one we're doing, but these kids live at home where they get quite a bit of support for their first language. So basically, will it be stressful? Has anyone suggested to you that learning in a second language will cause stress and be uncomfortable for your child? It's certainly understandable if adults have that image, because most of them studied language in high school under less than ideal conditions and could have been very frustrated, even just having to do it and not get anything much from it and get the benefits that those of us who get to really speak the language or even just read it very well get. But it's not the second language that causes the stress. When you get down to it, it's being expected to do something you're not ready to do. And the key is starting where the child is and taking small steps from there that add up over time. And that's one of the wonderful things about having a school program that's a planned curriculum that's based on the experience of how many different children learn and is flexible enough to accommodate children who learn in different ways. But it's making it doable. Never asking the child to do something. You want to get them what Vygotsky calls that zone of proximal development. You want to get them to the point where they can't do it by themselves, but they can do it with help. That's where you want to start. They can't do it by themselves, they can do it with help. So you help them, and then you scaffold them till they can do it by themselves. And then you go to the next thing, and you keep tracking this zone where the kid is just ready to learn the next thing, and that's the secret. Sort of like buy low and sell high. It's easier said than done, but it does make sense. And I'm very impressed that Hudson Way brings children in after the second grade. Most schools don't do it, but the key there too. When you think about it, that could be very frustrating for a child, but they do it. They give enough, and so I'm very impressed. Very few schools take the energy to do that. Okay. So we have another way of knowing that learning two languages isn't more stressful than learning one. And we get that from language impairment, studies of language impairment. So there's about an 8% of the population that is expected to have just a specific issue in their brains, don't quite compute the way everybody else's brains. And when I started my career, the received wisdom was to choose one language. Okay, get rid of that other language as fast as you can. I mean, it's kind of a Sophie's choice. You get rid of the mother's language or the father's language, right? But that was what it was. And I'm so thrilled that over the course of my career, maybe I helped a little bit. This has completely changed. First of all, what they found is that that doesn't solve the problem. If a child is having a problem in just one language, that's actually a sign that it's not a language impairment. If he's fine in one language, it's not a language impairment. It just means they haven't had enough time and opportunity in the language where they're having trouble. But dropping the language isn't going to solve the problem. And I was going to read to you, I'm behind my schedule. So I was going to read to you from, I heard just 3 days ago from one of the people in the book whose child is now grown, and she was a dyslexic child in a bilingual immersion school in Boston, the Inigo School, and spent a lot of time thinking that they were going to have to pull her out of the school. And they persevered and they did what they needed to do. They got the school to provide the support she needed. And she had friends from there. She had sisters from Ecuador. I don't know. And now she uses Spanish in her job. She works for, some congressional person, and she had a great elementary school, did well in high school, well in college, and now seems to be doing very well again. That said, sometimes when parents will make the decision, and in my book I do talk about some of the parents who make the decision, the child is having to work harder for one language and now is working harder for two languages. There has to be a good payback for that. And usually there is. But if there's not, or maybe something else is happening in the lives of the parents and they don't have the bandwidth to go the extra mile for that extra language, then you make the life decision. Bilingualism is wonderful, but it shouldn't trump everything else. Okay, I was going to read that, but I'm not. Okay, so now we have the Goldilocks problem on the other side. Okay, all those are about how, it's too hard for a child to learn another language. Oh dear, how can we send this? But now it's just as detrimental for you to think that kids learn languages so easily. They just soak it up like sponges. That's not quite true. Without a good reason, a child wouldn't just choose to learn a second language. Early on, pleasing their parents is enough of a good reason, but trust me, that does not last forever. And they can't just overhear a language or watch it being spoken. It's important to listen well enough to be able to respond. Interaction is the key, which, by the way, is the key for first language as well. And in fact, we've learned a lot about first language acquisition from studying bilinguals. But anyway, we also have another strong example that you can't just rely on them picking it up the way I did. I thought, my child's going to be in Miami, there's going to be Spanish and English all over the place, they're going to be able to speak. But even more so, we have so many families and that say, don't teach my child my language. We can do that at home. You concentrate on the community language, please. But they don't realize that the odds are, without support for that home language, even if that's the only language the child speaks at the entry to school, the child will probably not continue in that language and certainly won't be able to transmit it afterward. And another kind of learning that you might think just happens by being in a classroom, a multilingual classroom, a multicultural classroom, would be to learn about other cultures. But in fact, I have a colleague, Linda Tropf at University of Massachusetts, who did the study to find that out. And there's a description early on in the book. But basically, they had a class of all monolingual. What they were trying to find out is, when do children have attribute positive attributes to children of another ethnicity? Okay, it's going to be natural for them to attribute positive attributes to their own ethnicity, but will they also extend them to others? And so they had a class of all monolingual English speakers, and then they had another one with mixed bilingual Spanish, monolingual English, but the classes were all in English. And then the third class was the same composition, mixed Spanish and English, but all of the kids were learning both English and learning in both English and Spanish. So I have right here for you the first class. About 10% of gave positive attributes to Hispanics, to about 10% of the Hispanics. 13% for the picked up a little bit by having Spanish kids in class. 40% when they were working together, learning each other's languages. It's a pretty strong effect. Okay, I'm going to stop on this one pretty soon, but this is my favorite one. Okay, so people say, I don't share the language. I can't help my child with homework. Will it be a wedge between us? And the help you give your child with homework is not doing the homework and not even tutoring the child in the homework so much as making sure that the child has a space to do the homework, that making sure the child has time and the expectation that he or she is going to do it, right? And that if they do it, it'll be acknowledged. And maybe you can ask them to explain it to you. My favorite from when my daughter was in chemistry in high school, and it was all Greek to me, right? And had a lot of math, more math than I was comfortable with. And I would say to her, you just keep explaining it to me until you understand it. And amazingly, it typically worked. Okay. So you can do that. You can have them explain their Spanish homework or their Mandarin homework to you in English, and they'll be learning it twice. Okay. And don't worry about your non-native speaker. I'm one of the few experts who tell people about how to raise their children, who say it's fine to speak your not such perfect English or Spanish or French or whatever with your child. Now this one is important. Your child won't like it. What if my child doesn't like it and they won't want to go to school and they won't want to, and they'll be mad at me for doing this? This one is very, 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 very serious. And I have a long section in the book, and Sharon asked me to do another talk in a couple of weeks on what to do about this. making sure that the child likes it. How do you make sure they keep going? Okay, so when the child sort of stops at maybe age 6, why am I doing this, Mom? Why do I have to do this? Nobody else is doing this, right? And then if you've been doing your homework, you can just remind the child of the goal that they have set. Oh, you don't want to be trilingual anymore? I thought you told me last week you were so proud of being trilingual. Oh, yeah, okay, he just forgot, so forth. Anyway, you take it very seriously, and you have to, but don't fight. You're going to lose it. You'll lose the battle if you fight. So when they tell you to stop speaking to them in such and such a language, you say, well, you can stop it, but it makes me feel good, and I'm going to continue speaking. And, because of the way I feel, but, I'm certainly not going to force you to do it. But then you sit back and you say, okay, what isn't he getting from speaking this language? And sometimes it's just ice cream, but you're lucky if it's just ice cream. Little bribes sometimes help, but you're really going for I thought the person with the trilingual thing, I thought he had hit the jackpot. The parent had hit the jackpot on that one. Anyway, there are other practical ones that I'm not going to get to unless people ask about them. The bottom line is that 2 languages are better than 1, and you're doing the right thing to give them to them. And I wanted to show you my book, a little bit of my book. And I probably didn't do it well enough, but this is my first time showing it. So, and two children share two languages, and they're the two kids. And what you do is you start the book. Oops. You start the book on the one side, and you're reading the boy's story, right, from his point of view about the two of them. And then you flip the book over, and now you're reading the girl's story, and I have it in a different color too. And you're reading the girl's story of the same story, but from her point of view. And then they sort of get together finally. And what they do when they finally start getting together, they decide that, yeah, two languages is better than one, and they're going to do a little skit for their or game for their class on two being better than one. So you can see with one eye, but you see better and farther with two or four. And I sort of felt I had to be careful that I didn't diss people who have one eye, right? So it had to be kind of playful, right? And then on her side, I mean, he has this also in English, but then she has the other one in Spanish, but se puede brincar con una pierna, pero se puede correr más rápido con dos piernas. Y una carrera de tres piernas es más divertida. Okay? And then they go into this thing, well, you can't clap with one hand. You just can't clap with one hand. But then they say, oh, wait, you can high five. And so both of them end on the kids high-fiving in the middle, in the center hold. Anyway, thank you.
That's great. I'm looking forward to getting that book, Barbara. So I'm going to be first on you.
Well, you're going to help me. I promise you.
We're getting it. Absolutely. We're gonna spread the word. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to just read off the question. One of them is saying, just curious, the Indo-European languages are related, so studying one might be beneficial to learning the other, especially Romance languages. Wondering
Absolutely.
if there are studies of mixing non-European language.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, one of my best students was a Vietnamese woman, and she studied kids learning Vietnamese and English, and there's like nothing that overlaps. And in fact, the place where it's the most bilingual is Indonesia, that has 230 languages or something, and lots of bilinguals. And some of them are in the same family, but not all of them. And even in India, where there are so many different languages, some of those are just they're not in the same family. But they're definitely right. It's easier to learn. Like one of my things, my daughter was very good in Spanish. And then when she went to learn French, she said, I know I need a subjunctive here, but I don't know the form yet, right? So she already had that kind of background. And I had originally put that I didn't study another language. I started a little bit of French in high school, but mostly I studied Latin. And that was a great basis for learning other languages. So, and of course, it was the big thing in my high school. Even now, more than 50 years later, when I see people from my high school, did you have Mr. Matthews, the Latin teacher?
No,
Anyway,
and there's also studies from Ellen Bialystok, I believe, Barbara, you would know this, that talk about the benefits of cognitive benefits. And they did a Hebrew, English, Chinese test, and they determined that there was a benefit for those that were doing the Chinese. They were still outpacing those that were monolingual. It's a little bit different than what we're talking about here, related.
Exactly. So there's no one language that's easier to learn as a first language, but the question is absolutely right. And in fact, they have it quantified. The State Department has it quantified. How long does it take an English speaker to learn this language, or these languages, or that language? And they have it, they'll pay you so much, they'll pay us. Anyway, there definitely is. But there's not one language that can't be learned by somebody else, because it just makes it easier.
Right.
On the other hand, if you don't know anything about it, you learn more. You have more to learn. Okay.
Right.
Next question.
So we have a question here from a family whose child was in a they're non-Mandarin speaking family. They did Mandarin in an immersion program up through age 5, and then going to an American elementary school where they might start from the beginner level, and they're concerned that their child might get bored, lose interest should they get a tutor in kindergarten and first
Well,
grade.
they should wait and see. um, and it's quite possible, but it sounds like if they're sending them to a good school, a good Mandarin school, they can differentiate I mean, that's the big thing in education, is to differentiate and use that child as a resource for others. Teaching is twice learning, things like that. But definitely they need to watch it. And one thing you don't want, and you know better than I do, you don't want a bored child in school. It's trouble. And it's a waste of the child's, it's a waste of the child's time, energy, and learning potential.
There's the good thing with virtual, now we're all virtual. There's so many other resources. So even if you can't get it in the elementary school, there are ways to keep the child challenged. Because I think you talked about having meaningful tasks, not just exchange for memorization of vocabulary, but really being able to do interesting things. And that's why an immersion program is useful versus just a foreign language program.
I thought that the questioner was going to ask, he's going to go into a regular kindergarten, will he lose his Mandarin? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
I have a quote.
Right.
My theory, and this is just my own theory, I haven't got a scientific thing, is that unless you learn to read in the second language, it's not going to stick.
Mm-hmm. So what's the input regarding studies that assert that a child can quite literally learn infinite numbers of languages? Is there an upper limit?
There's an upper limit. Yes, there's an upper limit. Time. So I have a little story, I think it's in my book, about Charles Berlitz, who lived in a household where everybody spoke a different language. And when he got to be 5, he thought he was supposed to have his own language too. I know Ken Hale at MIT, who died, maybe 15 years ago. He was famous for having spoken 20 languages well. And okay, there's a joke about Roman Jakobson, the big linguist, that he spoke Russian in 7 languages, but because he had such a strong accent in them all. But basically, it's a time. So I think that it takes time and effort to arrange the child's environment to have enough time for English, for English and another language. Once you get to 3 languages, you've really got to start juggling, okay? Because it's not like they're going to confuse them. They're pretty good at keeping, it's not like they'll never confuse them, but it's not a big issue. But it's time. So it's time and necessity. People don't just sit around and learn languages so they can learn languages. Well, there is a polyglot savant. You may want to learn about him. But he was severely retarded, but he could pick up a language just by looking at a book. But meanwhile, you have to have a reason for the language. So typically you have to have a reason for the language. And so that's one bound. As I say, I've never heard of anybody more than the Ken Hale's 20, and I've heard of a couple of others that speak 20. There's some studies. Now, the person may want to look up polyglots. There are some famous polyglots. And the other one is this polyglot savant. That is a really fascinating question by Neil Smith. Anyway, did I answer the question? I think I did. It's time.
The one of the questions is whether or not this is recorded. So yes, it is, and everyone who's registered for this, we're going to send the link to the recording. I want to say that we're going to do the second part of this series on August 18th, 7 to 8. So if you want to register and if you share or like, we are giving away, picking winners to get this book for free. So please do that between now and then, and you'll pick up a free copy that we'll mail to you. Let's see, we have just a minute or two for any last minute questions, but
Can I?
Mhm.
Well, can I ask how many people in those people who are here are themselves bilingual?
Well, that's a good
Can they
poll
raise their hands or
question.
whatever? I don't know how they
That
do
would
that.
have been a good poll question to ask.
And well, or maybe we'll save that for the next time.
Yeah,
How many are bilingual? What
sorry.
I always like to ask is how many are bilingual and how many are child bilinguals? Because when I used to study the kids at the University of Miami, it was actually fairly rare to be child bilinguals. Maybe not more than 15%.
Okay. Oh, wait, we think we have a couple questions. If a child clearly understands the second language but is reluctant to speak it, is it fair to say once he or she is in a situation where he must speak it, that he can do so fluently? How do you encourage them to speak it?
Well, there are kids who stay silent for a while. It's a stage. Okay, you read about it, and there's a stage where they just don't want to put themselves out there. It's more a personality thing, I think. But parents sometimes ask me, well, he understands, but he doesn't speak. Is he going to learn to speak? And I think it goes the other way. That's not the progression. So you don't, if the only reason he's not speaking is because he's shy or doesn't have something to say, that's one thing. But if he doesn't practice doing it, I don't think he's going to be in what we call an active bilingual. It ends up being a passive bilingual. It's not bad. It's better than not having any sense, but it's not the natural progression. Typically, and it's the same thing. I had a friend who was a reading teacher. She said, as soon as the kid can say hi, I can teach him to read it, right? So as soon as he understands something, he has something that he can learn to say or respond to. And that's the way he gets into, it's an interaction that he gets into speaking. But if he's just, there's that old joke about the kid who didn't talk till he was 4. And they said, and all of a sudden he says, the toast is burned. And they said, what? You can talk? And he says, why didn't you talk before? And he says, everything was okay before.
The house wasn't burning. So this is, another question about how we register for the second part. So on our website, HWIS, HudsonWayImmersionSchool.org, there's a link under events where you can register for the second part of this. And it's where we're going to talk about the very practical aspects of the tips and the learnings. And Barbara, you've seen this whole thing over 30 years of your career. So it'd be real interesting to talk to you about what you've seen with people that have gone.
Well, and mostly what parents have told me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, I've done the research studies, but I also learned a whole lot. It was easier to talk to them than to start writing. So I did a good bit of talking to families. And in one family, I had the parents, I had the girl who had been raised bilingually, and then she had a kid. So I had her as a child and as a mother. Anyway, so I learned a lot from people like your audience.
So Barbara, we have one final question. We'll just take one more. How successful is part-time language instruction versus immersion instruction for achieving fluency? Are there any studies on that? Yeah.
Yeah, there are. Well, first of all, we have to define part-time. Mm-hmm. But I can give her what my kids went through the Miami public schools, which, by the way, were actually pretty good, except for they didn't teach them language until. And they had 20 minutes a day for Spanish class. And what my daughter said is, Mom, we learn the days of the week and the colors every year. Right. So there are studies. I'd have to dig it up, but I've called through them to find them actually from Miami to show that those programs really didn't teach very much at all. You need time, you need seriousness, and you need interaction.
Right.
And I mean, it's helpful. I mean, you know, they learn songs and stuff like that. They did learn the days of the week really well. But there's no comparison to me.
Right. Right. Well, we have some links to some of these studies on our website, and we'll talk about that. We'll put up some more links under resources. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Went a little over time, but a lot of great questions, and we'll look forward to getting together again on Tuesday in 3 weeks.
Okay, and on the screen they see my email.
Yes.
Or Zurer Pearson at UMass.edu. So if you have questions, I always love to get questions, especially from parents.
I just popped up one more. Do we have time for one more, Barbara? Just one more?
I do. I don't know about them.
Okay. Is there any value? I know. We'll just take this one last one. Is there any value in a one-time-a-week mommy and me class before the age of 2? A lot of people have those programs.
Well, when you say, is there any value for what? So there's definitely value for mommy and me to do a class together. And I have a friend who does things at the library for people who aren't going to be getting immersion schools. And she does mucho gusto, she calls it. It's a wonderful thing. And the parents are there and kids of different ages, and they do those kind of you know, not hokey pokey, but games that have songs that have actions with them, and they're wonderful. Okay, when we didn't have anything, soon after our book, we used to do a language lounge where people would come and they would take turns doing activities with the children. It's all good, but the question is, do you want to get a Ph.D. from it? I don't think it leads there. But there's a lot of more steps. But that's a wonderful first step. Absolutely.
I always think that the value of that is really, it's like dipping your toe in the water, and it's a great way for, if it's done well, it's done 100% in the target language, and moms get to kind of have a front row seat to seeing how that language process is happening even for a 2-year-old. So.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much, and great webinar, Barbara, and we'll look forward to 3 weeks from now. And please share and like, and you'll get a free book. So we're looking forward to giving out 6 of them. So please do.
Wonderful.
Yep. Okay, take care, everyone. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for joining.
Okay. So,
let me
okay.
Hang on.
I'm so glad your face was there. Thank you. I kept looking at you. I hope you didn't mind. I have a friend who's on the town council here, and she hates it when there's a meeting and you can't tell who's in the audience unless they ask a question. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye.
Okay, have a great night.
I'm going to go take a walk because
Awesome. Thank you, Barbara.
So
we'll talk soon.
Covered most of your points, not all of them.
We'll talk soon. Great job. Thank you. Bye. Good night.